My name is Richard Gauthier, and the subject is the introduction to the science of microvita. Well, microvita, it's a new concept. It was relatively new now. It was introduced in 1986 in a discourse by Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, and he introduced it as a new scientific concept related to the origin of life in the universe. Now, I was not present at this first talk, which was given in December 1986 at a meeting in India, but the following spring I attended a follow-up talk. And so I was interested right from the beginning when I heard about microvita. I have a physics background, I have a psychology background, and I have a kind of an interest in things like evolution and the origin of life, and particularly in recent months, I've been getting back into thinking about the origin of life in relationship to the subject of microvita. It's a very interesting concept, and I'd like to encourage you to think about microvita in relationship to cosmology and the whole evolution of the universe. Because currently there is an understanding that the universe came into existence about 13.8 billion years ago. No one really knows what happened before the beginning of the universe, or even if there was a before, from a scientific point of view. But the idea that's accepted by most people in physicists and cosmologists is that the universe came into being as almost a point of matter and energy that expanded very quickly in a process called inflation, in a fraction of a second. And then it kept expanding, but at a slower rate, producing a mixture of hot gases that had varying temperatures. That's indicated by this sort of temperature picture about 380,000 years after what's called the Big Bang. And that was just hot gases. But over billions of years, those hot gases, because of their temperature differences, formed into galaxies, and those galaxies, and developed, and it brings us up to the present, about 13.8 billion years after the Big Bang. Now, we know that at least on the Earth, life developed on the planet Earth, but no one really knows how scientifically life came into existence from matter, because the early Earth was just, there was solid matter, there was liquid water and an atmosphere. That was about 4 billion years ago. But then somehow it seems factually or scientifically, different forms of life appeared on the Earth and went through different changes leading up to the present, where we have many hundreds of thousands of different species of animals and plants. But still, it's not really understood. There are different views of how life came into existence. So the concept of microvita is very much related to that question of how life came into the universe and how different species developed over time. Okay, so microvita, as they were introduced, they were described as having three different kind of categories. The simplest kind of category of microvita was said by P.R. Sarkar to be related to viruses. And he said they could be seen in a very powerful microscope, and they were somehow responsible for the spread of life in the universe. A second category of microvita were described as more subtle, that they could not be seen. They're more on a mental level, but they were known by their actions. He didn't give very many details. Then a third category of microvita, again, more subtle, are somehow related to concepts. And he described them as bringing concepts into the realm of perception. People who had conceptually highly developed minds would be able to visualize the ideas being brought to them by different kinds of subtle microvita. And he encouraged microvita research, or research on the subject of microvita, to be started as soon as possible. Basically, he said before, how did he say it? With no further delay, even when he gave his first discourse on microvita. He said that research could be done in our mental laboratories because they can be understood in a subtle way, and they could also be studied in physical laboratories. And so, well, that caught my attention, actually, from the beginning, because I was thinking these microvita, how are they different from other subtle life energies or life, different aspects of life? Are they the same as what's called chi, or how are they related to prana, things like that are not really scientifically proved either, but are microvita the same as that or different? So let me go to the next picture. In relationship to the idea of microvita in the universe, the two main they were contending for a while theories of the origin of the universe. One was proposed by Georges Lemaitre, who is a Belgian astrophysicist and Catholic priest, and he proposed, based on the ideas that came out of general relativity theory, that the universe could have created from an explosion and expanded and would have a finite origin. That became known as the Big Bang Theory. Actually, the name Big Bang Theory was given by Fred Hoyle, who is another astrophysicist who had an alternative idea for the creation or the production of the existence of the universe, which he proposed as a steady state theory. Many scientists had the idea that the universe might have existed forever, and that little amounts of matter could come into existence from time to time, and so that there would be no actual origin of the universe, but somehow the universe would look more or less like it does at present. Even in the past also it could look the same. Finally, that steady state theory was, you can say, defeated scientifically by experimental evidence that supported the Big Bang Theory, such as the evidence that galaxies are on the average receding from each other, and their speed is proportional to the distance of how far away. And if you go back in time, you can imagine that all those galaxies sort of originated at a single point in time, and that gave the idea that the Big Bang was the origin of the universe. Although Georges Lemaitre was a Catholic priest, he separated his astrophysics from his religion, and his ideas were based on the mathematics and science related to general relativity. And Fred Hoyle was basically a materialist, a naturalist thinker. He didn't like the Big Bang Theory, and one of the reasons is because it looked like the universe would have some kind of origin, which having an origin might imply a creator. So P.R. Sarkar, who's pictured in this, also proposed a cycle of creation. He called it the cosmic cycle of creation, which is, you can say, a kind of a combination of some steady state aspects and some Big Bang aspects as well. This has to be developed more scientifically because he gave it more as a philosophy than a science. But in giving the concept of microvita, he also said that in the future, that cosmology will become more of a science, with microvita being one of the key aspects of the new science, new scientific approach. Micro that would, in working together, create our physical universe. But that science of microvita, is perhaps hundreds of years in the future. Anyway, just a brief summary, because I want to put microvita into a cosmological context. Rajan Sarkar proposed that consciousness is what is fundamental to the universe, and that everything else is consciousness which has given different qualities. So there's supreme consciousness, starting, you can say, which has always been present, timeless, but it has a creative power. Consciousness has a creative power that can give qualities to itself, that first it can give a quality of a sense of existence to itself, then a sense of action, and a sense of creating the results of actions. And so when that happens, we've got a consciousness becomes in part a cosmic mind. Cosmic mind starts thinking. It has its own sense of existence, sense of action, and creates results in its mind. So the cosmic mind creates the universe in its mind, and the universe is therefore a thought projection of the cosmic mind. And the universe goes through a stage of, if you describe it in terms of wavelengths, wavelengths become shorter and shorter, and the matter becomes more subtle to, you can say, describe it as cruder, relatively cruder, starting with an etheric, subtle state of matter, then to an aerial state, and a luminous state, a liquid state, and a solid state. And consciousness is being given more and more qualities during this whole process, and the more qualities given to consciousness by its creative power, the more physical and the more crude the state of the cosmic mind becomes. But it reaches a point of maximum crudification at solid matter, and then there's a kind of a turning point. The creative power of consciousness starts to withdraw some of its properties, and at the same time, the crude matter vibrations become more subtle, and they develop qualities of both life and mind. So from physical matter, which is actually crudified consciousness, living beings come into existence, and each has its own mind, a simple mind at the beginning. But then you have, as the creative power of consciousness withdraws its ability to give many different qualities, the living beings become more and more subtle. Plants and animals grow, and finally up to human beings. So we're still talking about the cosmic cycle of creation. Human beings have what's called a fully reflecting consciousness. Their mind is able to fully reflect consciousness, which animals and plants cannot do. Human beings have the ability to realize to some extent who they are and where they are and what is their goal or purpose in life, and realize finally that they can develop themselves further, expand their minds, conceptually develop their minds more and more, and finally merge their minds and their whole sense of existence back into the supreme consciousness. And for an individual, that completes a cosmic cycle of creation, but the cosmic cycle of creation is going on infinitely, with an infinite number of unit consciousnesses being created by the cosmic consciousness, and each one of them going through a evolutionary process culminating in the return of each unit consciousness back to cosmic consciousness. So that's Prabhat-Ranjan Sarkar's theory of cosmology. It's a cycle because it has a starting point of consciousness, infinite consciousness, and that's the ending point as well. So the question then, even starting around 1955, before the concept of microvita was introduced. So in 1986, when microvita were introduced and it was said that they create life and mind in the universe, the question is, well, how do they fit into the cosmic cycle of creation? Well, P.R. Sarkar gave a hint by the title of his first discourse was Microvitum, the Mysterious Emanation of Cosmic Factor. And cosmic factor, well, you can think, well, what does that mean? But it seems like he's talking about the cosmic mind, because as he describes the cosmic mind, all the different entities in existence, either physical or mental, are in the cosmic mind, and even matter evolves from the cosmic mind. But according to P.R. Sarkar, microvita actually are involved in the process of forming matter as well. So at the stage as the cosmic mind becomes, you can say, from the sense of I exist to I do to I have, where different objects are created, microvita could be created there as well. And microvita, he indicated that they can form atoms and subatomic particles, so that microvita are existing even from the beginning of the first matter, that matter itself, he suggested carbon atoms are composed of the billions of microvita, the solidification of billions of microvita, and other chemical atoms are also composed of microvita and subatomic particles as well. So what scientists consider as inert, lifeless matter, according to the microvita theory, it's all composed of living beings, microvita. They may be in a state of kind of a dormant state. They're not active except to the extent of forming matter, but they exist. So that as matter is developing, as galaxies and stars and planets are developing, going down to the state of solid matter on the surface of planets and under the sea, you can get to a state of where the question arises, how does life, come into existence from matter? And the materialist view is that matter is purely non-living, and somehow it combines together, atoms combine together and become more and more complexly organized, and somehow that complexity of organization brings life into existence and even brings mind into existence. The materialist view is that mind develops out of the organization of inert matter. But the microvita gives a different other picture, that maybe if matter is not inert, or it's not, matter is not dead, matter is composed of microvita, then microvita could somehow become activated, and those microvita, when they became activated, could then create life and mind. So it's a different way of looking at the origin of life and mind in the universe, which is actually not well explained at all by the materialistic view. How does inert matter just by becoming organized, start becoming able to experience itself? This has never been explained by materialist philosophers. So the way I first started thinking about microvita scientifically, I guess because of my physics background, let me step back. Because he said that, Pierre Sarkar said that microvita were involved in the origin and evolution of life, I started thinking and writing about how that might happen biologically. And he had proposed, and I knew that he had proposed that microvita can develop into viruses. And I started researching about viruses, and found that viruses are very, they're not considered living by most biologists, but they can reproduce when they get into cells, and they take over the chemical machinery of cells to reproduce themselves. And sometimes they destroy the cells that they are reproducing in, and sometimes not. But they're kind of a borderline living being, you can say, just like a seed. You can say a seed may not seem to be alive, but when you put it in the ground, it can start to grow by taking the materials that are in the ground and using them to reproduce itself. Anyway, so I wrote a book actually proposing that microvita form viruses, and viruses carrying DNA or RNA could develop the first living cells. And also, once the living cells were developed, the further microvita could be attracted to living beings and give additional DNA to the living beings to increase their genes, to make them more complex. And in that way, different species could develop. That it wasn't just a process of random mutation and natural selection according to Darwin, but according to P.R. Sarkar, living beings made different efforts to you can say, be more satisfied in their environment, and their efforts to somehow change themselves, it seems, it's the way I'm thinking, attracted the microvita, which allowed them to make the genetic changes they needed to change their physical structures and their minds as well. And so that was an aspect of my book, Microvita, Cosmic Seeds of Life, proposing a new theory of evolution based on viruses bringing DNA and RNA to help develop, to originate life and develop new species as well. But it was kind of on a theoretical level, because I didn't know how to test that idea. So in the meantime, I started thinking about the physics of microvita, because P.R. Sarkar said that microvita form atoms and also subatomic particles. So I left the biological aspect in the book in my proposal for the origin and evolution of life from viruses, and thought about how microvita could act in the physical world. Well, here's a little diagram that sort of summarizes the state of does microvita fit into the cosmic cycle of creation. So here's unqualified supreme consciousness. Consider that as the whole field that everything comes from, by being qualified by the creative power of consciousness. So then you have a portion of unqualified supreme consciousness becomes qualified, develops properties, and the cosmic mind develops. And from the cosmic mind, the universe is formed from a further giving of qualities to the cosmic mind that creates the physical factors of ethereal, aerial, luminous, liquid, and solid. But it could happen in the form of the explosion, which is described as the Big Bang, because we don't know what caused the Big Bang. we only know now that only about 5% of the observable universe is ordinary matter. About 27 is what's an unknown substance called dark matter, and we just don't know anything about it except it has a gravitational force to attract other matter. And then something which is even more mysterious called dark energy, which seems to be responsible for the accelerated expansion of the universe. Nothing is known about it except that you can somehow quantify it and say something about how the universe is expanding at a particular rate, accelerating faster and faster because of the dark energy, which has a kind of a negative gravitational effect. You can think of it like that, to cause the universe to expand faster and faster. But the universe is still somewhat mysterious because 95% of it is unknown material. And also, we don't really know why the universe can come from nothing and expand into something. How does that happen scientifically? There are theories about it, but there's no final answer. So I took the idea of microvita forming matter, and I kind of looked into that. Let me just summarize a couple of things that P.R. Sarkar said about microvita and what they are. I'll just read this. There are entities who come within the realm of both physicality and psychic expression, which are smaller or subtler than atoms, or electrons or protons. And in the psychic realm, they may be subtler than ectoplasms. For such objects or for such entities, I use the term microvitum. These microvitum, or in plural microvita, may be, are not, of protoplasmic order, and as such, they have got little to do with carbon molecules or carbon atoms, which are treated as the initial point or initial state of life in this universe. In other words, people who think about the origin of life think that it basically came out of just physical atoms becoming organized into molecules. So far as physicality is concerned, these microvita are, their position is just between ectoplasm and electron, and ectoplasm is the yogic term for mind stuff, that aspect of the mind which takes different shapes. So it's subtler than physical matter, but they're neither ectoplasm nor electron. And this quote is taken from P.R. Sarkar's first lecture, Microvitum, the mysterious emanation of cosmic factor. So the fact that they create atoms and molecules, it still doesn't say how that happens. He also described that they move throughout the universe from one celestial body to another, and thus they move everywhere, crossing the boundaries of nebula, piercing through Milky Ways, galaxies, stars, satellites, planets, and meteors. Obviously, a galaxy is much bigger than a meteor, but this describes how microvita just move easily throughout the universe. They move unbarred, without caring for the atmospheric condition or barometric reading of pressure. So I was wondering how fast microvita can move. And when he says galaxies, microvita can pierce through galaxies, our Milky Way galaxy is about 100,000 light years from one end of the dish to the other end. It takes light about 100,000 years to travel across. And if microvita are piercing through galaxies, it's suggested to me that maybe they are able to travel faster than light, because it takes 100,000 years for light to travel across. Okay, well, maybe microvita could travel across faster than that. So I wanted to see if I could put that into some kind of quantitative form. If microvita might travel faster than light, what could you say about them? If microvita were involved in composing particles, I developed a little mathematical model of a photon as a helical movement of energy. And the energy is being carried by a microvita, okay, or maybe many microvita. But this is a helix that is wrapped around a cylinder, you can see. So it's actually moving in a kind of a spiral motion around the cylinder. And when I put the different properties of a photon into the model, first I assumed a helical motion. There are certain equations for photon speed itself is the speed of light, but that's in the forward direction. But if something is going around in a curving manner and moving it forward at the speed of light, you can see that the motion along the helix has to be faster than light. To keep up with the forward motion of a photon, something moving helically has to move faster than light. And so photons have momentum given by a certain relationship involving Planck's constant. They have energy also related to their frequency. They have a wavelength, and photons have a spin as well. So all of that information I put into my helical model of a photon, and a simple result came out. If L is the wavelength of the photon, one complete turn, then it turned out that the photon was traveling faster than the speed of light in this photon model at exactly the square root of 2, which is 1.414 times the speed of light. So a photon could be considered as a microvita moving in a helical motion faster than light, where its energy and its frequency and its momentum are all related to the actual physical parameters describing a photon. Okay, so that got me started, okay, thinking, well, I've got a quantitative model for photons as being superluminal in terms of their internal motion, and I applied that to electrons. Okay, if you take a photon like a slinky, many helical turning slinky, if you close it together, take a single wavelength of a slinky and close it together, you can form a closed slinky or a closed helix, and you get get a model of the electron. So the model of the electron that came out of this photon model was a closed helix, and this is the helix itself is represented by the line motion going on, and the fact that it's closed means the actual trajectory of the helix. It doesn't look like a helix because it's moving in a closed helix form. But anyway, my photon model developed into a double helix model. So I have a double helix model of a photon, and it's known that photons can be converted into electron-positron pairs if they come close to a nucleus of an atom, and then they have the proper energy, sufficient energy to produce an electron-positron pair. And so I developed my microvita model to have a photon producing, and it's a superluminal, internally superluminal photon, creating an internally superluminal electron and an internally superluminal positron. So this is electron and positron, and they're just moving off. So it was 2018, not working obviously full time, but this was in 1992 when I did this first calculation. And I wrote other papers in the meantime, and while the rest of my life was also going on. But in 2018, I had the model of a photon, double helix photon, producing closed electron positron models. And it seemed like you could describe this superluminal particle as a microvita. So this was my way of thinking about how microvita combined with energy could produce particles. And if they can produce particles like the electron and other physical particles, then they could produce atoms and then molecules as well. So atoms and molecules could all be composed of these superluminally moving particles, which I finally called superluminal primordial information quanta, which is abbreviated as SPRINQ. Superluminal primordial, because the first matter was made out of microvita. Information, because they carry information about what kind of particles can be produced. And the microvita are also quantized to make quantum particles. Okay, well, that's one aspect of my microvita research in terms of the how matter could be formed of microvita. But about 6 months ago, I started thinking again, because I reread portions of my own microvita book, and here's a little story that just before the microvita book went to press in 1988, I received some more information about microvita that was it wasn't published in the normal speeches, but it was given to an acharya who spoke with Baba and asked questions and answers about microvita, which the acharya named Vimalananda wrote down, and more, so it was information that was not in the other lectures, but it was further information about microvita. And I put that into my book just before it went to press. I didn't have much time to think about it, but I wanted to include it as more information about microvita, because it also mentioned microvita, viruses, RNA, DNA. And I thought, oh, I should put that into my book, although I didn't have time to think about it at the time, about how that information could be applied. But when I reread this information last year, it started me thinking again about microvita in relationship to the origin of life. And up till that time, there's been no experiment proposed about how to test the concept of microvita scientifically. In other words, scientists, it's not enough to have a concept. You have to have an experiment, and you have to have a hypothesis that predicts the results of experiments, and it has to be something that scientists can sort of, test and learn more about microvita. It could be a new scientific subject, a new scientific field. So to give a little bit of information about that, the additional information that came about microvita that was included in my book, but which I hadn't analyzed at the time, was that the cosmic mind emanates microvita. And this is part of an experimental proposal that was published in an Indian microvita bulletin called BOMRIN, BOMRIN, where I took some of these concepts that were published in my book that I hadn't used before and tried to apply them to the origin of life. So some of the statements about microvita that came through this one of the teachers that he spoke with are that the cosmic mind is emanating microvita, and some of those microvita carry information about the genetic information, DNA or RNA. So this is the chemicals that form our genes, and not only our genes, but the genes of all living beings, and they're also found in viruses as well. He said the cosmic mind emanates microvita, carrying codes of DNA and RNA. Now this, because I had learned more about DNA and RNA in the meantime, it's not known how DNA or RNA came into existence in evolution. People who are studying the origin of life are basically stumped. They have some theories, but the theories don't explain how a very complex DNA molecule, which actually codes with using different chemical molecules, codes information for the construction of proteins from the DNA molecule. How could all of that evolve by chance? And no one has a really good explanation for it today. And some people say, it looks like it happened it's a miracle, because it looks like it's so inconceivable how DNA, which code for constructing proteins, the proteins are very complex molecules which act mostly as enzymes for chemical reactions to make them go in cells, where those DNA and RNA came from. The problem in origin of life research is in living cells, DNA is manufactured with the help of many proteins. Okay, so you need proteins to make DNA. But where the proteins come, the proteins are coded in the genetic code of DNA. So in order to get proteins, you need DNA. And in order to make DNA, you need proteins. So the idea that a living cell contains a complex organization of both DNA and RNA moving in this kind of circular way, each one creating the other, how could that have happened by accidentally, you can say, or by chance encounters of molecules? Different proposals have been given, but no one has come up with a good source of DNA, by evolution, you can say. So the fact that P.R. Sarkar said that microvita are carrying DNA or RNA information, not physically, but in the microvita themselves, coming from the cosmic mind, well, is that the origin of DNA and RNA? And if it is, how could you show that? How could this idea that the cosmic mind emanates microvita carrying DNA and RNA codes, how could that be tested in a laboratory? But he also said that billions of microvita form chemical atoms. That he said in one of his discourses. In this new information, he said that explosions at the atomic level in a chemical solution awaken microvita in these atoms. Okay, so this was not published in his discourses, but it came as additional information that atoms, which he said were made of microvita, can be explode somehow, and I interpreted that as happening by radioactivity, because he used the term jadisphota, which means matter explosion at the atomic level. I interpreted that to mean as a radioactive decay of an atom would release some of those billions of microvita that are composing an atom. Okay, and he said that those microvita become awakened. So they're not just now composing an atom, they can do something else. Well, what do? He says these awakened microvita carrying DNA codes expand after they are released from atoms and form viruses. Okay, microvita form viruses, and because the microvita were carrying DNA or RNA codes, they are able, because of the ability of what microvita can do, they create molecular DNA or RNA when they expand to form viruses. So DNA or RNA are actually formed by the microvita as they expand to form viruses. Of course, this goes way beyond how scientists are currently thinking about the origin of viruses. They don't know where viruses came from. The general thinking is that they originated from living cells and they somehow broke away from living cells and then moved to other cells. But that subject is not closed. And so the origin of viruses is not really understood. The idea that microvita could form viruses, which then create living cells, that would be something very interesting if it could be tested experimentally. So that led me to an idea of, okay, if microvita are released from radioactive materials, then we need to get a radioactive material or several different varieties. Now, it's known that when a radioactive atom breaks down, it gives off different particles, gives off called alpha, beta, or gamma particles, or alpha particles are just the helium of nucleus of helium atoms, beta particles are electrons, and gamma particles are just high energy photons. But if microvita are also being released when a radioactive atom decays. And microvita are quite subtle, that microvita could actually travel through different materials. They could travel through glass. Of course, light can also travel through glass. Some radioactive material energies, depending on the kind of glass, that might stop the alpha particles or the beta particles, or some might get through. Okay, but if microvita got through, then you could have a chemical solution. This is in my proposed experiment, a chemical solution that had different chemicals that are contained in living materials, but just in inorganic forms. It could be just carbon or carbon dioxide, or some nitrogen, some phosphorus. Different people have tried these kind of experiments before to see if they could, by sending electric shocks or electric sparks through materials, could you produce something? And there was some success, but limited success. When an experiment was done in 1953 by I think it was George Miller, he produced some of the amino acids that are used in the in the formation of proteins. He got a few amino acids, and a few other organic materials were also formed if you send an electric spark through a mixture or a gas containing these different chemicals. But he never got living living bacteria, and no one has succeeded in forming living bacteria from a bottle of inanimate chemicals. Well, P.R. Sarkar also suggested that there could be the presence of Fe3O4, because he mentioned that specifically as if it was in the solution that could help the developing viruses, take particular forms. I proposed including, in addition to this chemical solution, some magnetite, which is just Fe3O4, as a material that maybe the microvita will act at the surface of the material, or maybe they will use the iron atoms, or maybe this will be like a source of energy. But I just suggested in this proposed experiment a mixture of chemicals, have some magnetite, and people could try other things as well in one sealed container. And here's my radioactive material in another container, which maybe it could be sealed, or maybe it could just be isolated from this. This is like you can say a closed test tube, sterilized, so it doesn't have any bacteria at the beginning. So the experiment has to be very carefully controlled so that it doesn't have anything living, either viruses, no bacteria, nothing can be present. Otherwise, you wouldn't know if you're creating living cells with the microvita technique. So if you have a purely inert chemical solution, and then you bring nearby, so here's this, this is a Geiger counter just to show that you're detecting radioactivity, but here's some material, bring it near to the test tube and have a microscope that is available to look at slides that of this liquid, and see, and this is the question, see if different kinds of bacteria form under the microscope that just weren't there at all before. Normally bacteria divide and form other bacteria, but no one knows where the first bacteria came from. That's the problem of the origin of life. How did bacteria and other simple cells originate from inanimate matter? So this is a test to see if you can get living cells from the presence of nearby radioactive materials that produce bacteria. And if you take this container, this radioactive carbon-14 or some other atom, take it away, okay, move it away, so that it's nowhere near the chemical solution, you should not get formation of bacteria, okay? So one of the controls of this experiment is that if you're getting bacteria being formed, which would be amazing, okay, but it should only happen when the radioactive material is nearby. Take away the radioactive material and the process of formation of new bacteria should go away or disappear. And then bring back the carbon, radioactive carbon, bring it near, and then that should, with a new solution, again, you start getting bacteria forming just from the solution. Okay, so that's the proposed experiment, which, this is, I could call it simplified design. Radioactive material brought near to a test tube of chemicals that could form living substances, and in the presence of certain materials, which could be also experimented, and the chemicals could also be varied experimentally to maybe see which works best, okay? And if living cells are created, that would be a first, okay? As long as you can show that there were no living bacteria or viruses in the test tube before, and then you bring the radioactive material nearby and bacteria start appearing in the solution under your microscope, you've just created bacteria in a laboratory. And what kind of bacteria they are has to be figured out. They may be bacteria that would have been early bacteria in the origin of life. The present bacteria today are not maybe the same kinds of bacteria that were created or formed when the Earth was just starting to cool down 4 billion years ago. Anyway, if you got a positive result, that positive result would have to be repeated, carefully to make sure that it's really happening. That's how science works. And you also need to be able to have other people replicate the experiment. Maybe you publish the experiment first when you're satisfied with it, and when you're the reviewers, because this has to be written up in a scientific article, sent and for peer reviewed, and it has to pass a strong peer review, which is going to be very skeptical, because this would never have happened before. Living cells created in a test tube in the presence of radioactivity, because those bacteria have DNA and RNA in them. And the question would be, where did that DNA and RNA come from? Well, before there wasn't any DNA and RNA in the chemical solution. It was just a mixture of nitrogen and carbon and phosphorus and what else? Oxygen, or combinations of those, but not biochemicals. There would be no DNA or no RNA in this solution. So if it's in the bacteria, it had to have been created, from the chemicals in the material, and only in the presence of nearby radioactivity. So if that experiment has not been done, and I've proposed this experiment to a number of origin of life researchers by just writing to them, but mostly they either ignore me or they say, oh, we're not equipped to do that kind of experiment, something like that, a polite refusal. So I'm still, and I'll continue to look for a team or an experimenter who's experienced in origin of life research, or at least has the skills to do this experiment and to be able to do a carefully controlled experiment and to write it and get an accepted journal article, which could then be followed up by other researchers. So what would be the implications of a positive result? It would mean that the RNA and DNA in the bacteria could only have been produced in relationship to the radioactive material, because if you remove the radioactive material, you don't get the result. Okay, so somehow DNA and RNA, which don't occur by chance, are being created by the nearness of a radioactive material. That implies that the DNA and RNA is somehow associated with the radioactive material. Now, that itself would be a revolutionary idea, that a radioactive chemical contains DNA and RNA, which can be used for the origin of life. That's completely out of the box thinking for origin of life researchers. I mean, it's known that atoms are quite complicated in their quantum effects, but there's no conception that they contain billions of microvita carrying DNA and RNA information. So that would indicate that the source of DNA and RNA in the radioactive material has to be accounted for. The hypothesis that I'm proposing is, and because it basically came from Baba, P.R. Sarkar, is that the DNA and RNA is from microvita that compose the atoms. But that means, when are atoms composed? Well, most atoms are composed when stars explode. Only some hydrogen and helium at the beginning of the Big Bang. That's the main chemicals that are formed right after the Big Bang. And almost all other atoms are not formed until after the first stars are formed out of hydrogen and helium from the Big Bang. And those stars live for maybe some billions of years, and then they explode. And when they explode, if they explode as supernovas, that's when other chemical atoms are formed. So carbon atoms are formed in exploding stars. And of course, the microvita would have been around from the beginning, because they would also be in the hydrogen and helium in the first atoms in the universe, but they form carbon atoms when carbon atoms are created in exploding stars. So that raises the question, how did RNA for creating living cells get into the first carbon atoms in the universe, and which are formed from exploding stars? That means somehow that RNA information was somehow built into atoms or particles from the beginning of the universe, which means even back to the Big Bang, that RNA and DNA information is built into the Big Bang itself. And it takes billions of years for that carbon to actually form after the Big Bang. It forms, like I say, in exploding stars, but it was present in coded form at the beginning of the universe. Now, beginning of the universe, according to yoga philosophy, is that the universe came out of a cosmic mind. And the cosmic mind, therefore, would have generated the RNA and DNA. In other words, the cosmic mind, or you can say the mind of God, created the RNA and DNA codes that would be contained in the atoms that were formed much later on in the universe. And then some of those radioactive atoms, in a natural way, in different chemical environments, could have formed bacteria, and other DNA and RNA could have added to those the DNA of bacteria and caused them to be modified and caused them to develop into other species. Okay, so it's a microvita theory or hypothesis of the origin of life and the origin of species. But in order to accept the microvita hypothesis, what goes along with that is cosmic mind, because cosmic mind would be the source of the intelligence that is coded into the RNA and DNA. Okay, so and how to make the right DNA or RNA to create bacteria, you probably need some super cosmic computer to figure out what that DNA and RNA code should be to build it into microvita to put in atoms to create bacteria billions of years later. So indirectly, a positive result of this microvita radioactivity experiment would be, you could say, indirect evidence from microvita, first of all, because the hypothesis is that microvita are released from the radioactive atoms to form viruses, to form cells, and the microvita are formed by the cosmic mind. So take it back one more step, and you're indirectly supporting the hypothesis that a cosmic mind created microvita that created atoms, which created bacteria. And to explain this result in a materialistic way, I'll let you think about that. How could you account for the existence of DNA and RNA that is able to form bacteria? How can that DNA and RNA exist from the beginning of the universe? How could that have happened by chance? Well, someone will say, yes, it could have happened by chance. If you had an infinite number of big bangs, maybe some of them would carry DNA and RNA coded to create life in the universe. And you always have to consider the optional hypotheses. A positive result does not prove the existence of microvita, but it supports the idea that microvita contained in atoms carry DNA or RNA codes which are able to create life in a test tube and presumably in the early Earth as well. So this is this experiment is published in this bulletin about microvita research in India. It's called BOMRIM, BOMRIM, and it's available. So I think I'll close my sort of introduction to microvita and microvita science in the context of cosmology. And this is my information. You're welcome to write to me, and my website contains all of my research on my biological research and also my physics research related to microvita forming superluminal particles creating matter. So thanks for your attention, and I'd like to open the discussion for questions. And thanks very much. So I've stopped my sharing and I'm open to questions.
People can unmute themselves by clicking on the mic.
Say again?
That everybody can unmute themselves by clicking on their own mic.
Yes. And just speak up if you have a question. You just start, unless Didi can call on someone. Can you indicate you have a question by, there's a symbol for, if you have a question, you can indicate that in some way, or let's see who has a question. Please just speak up.
Cannot anybody unmute themselves?
Well, they probably would if they had a question.
Yeah, there are some people who are unmuted. Lokeshwar, several people are already unmuted because maybe they don't know. You have to click on your mic.
Okay, Didi.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, what is next? They have to ask you questions.
Yeah, if they have questions.
They have to ask you questions. There are several people unmuted already.
Any
Because the
other
other-
suggestions how to prove microvita exists? When it was first issued, we tried to do something with plants and kirtan and producing microvita water. Besides what you were talking about using
Definitely, there are other ways to approach testing for microvita. And some people have had good results by using spiritual chants with water and then using that water as a treatment. The problem is that you don't really know if you're testing for microvita or chi or something else. So you have to have a clear idea of what you're testing so that someone can say, yes, your concept of microvita, is the only thing that can explain what we found out. And it also has to be done in a controlled way. Like some people, if you tell them that you're giving them a medicine, they'll become cured from a disease, and it's just the power of their mind working. And that's called the placebo effect. So experiments to test for microvita really have to be properly, at least in the final analysis, they have to be done properly enough so that the result would be accepted in a scientific community. And proper procedures need to be followed, like double-blind experiments where neither the experimenter knows or the subject knows if it's the real substance being given or just water, for example, or just a sugar pill. So those kind of experiments need to be done with microvita also. And as far as I know, those kind of controlled experiments with the microvita water experiments have never been done.
We have in India, in the Ayurvedic medicine, what they call siddhis. This is siddhis. This is called siddhis. It is Ayurvedic medicine. And actually, I wonder if this is not the same concept, because it is made in a very highly spiritual process, and it is just by drinking this water that there is a change going on in the mind, and it is also bringing a better health and kind of realization, also mental realization.
It could very much be due to microvita, but the question is, how do you test that idea? You can have a medicine that works, and you don't really know why it works.
But it seems that it is a traditional approach, traditional medicine, which is used in India.
Yes.
Siddhis. It is called siddhis.
I agree. And these medicines do work, or they wouldn't be used for thousands of years.
Yeah, it works.
So from a scientific point of view, the question is, how do you know what is it in the medicine that's working? How is it working? Is it how to say it's not something else that's causing the effect? You see what I'm saying? It has to be done in a very technically accurate way. Otherwise, it will never be accepted not only by scientists. The public will accept something that works, but scientists will usually not accept something unless they have a theory that explains it. And they eliminate all the other possible explanations.
Could I take you back to the categories of microvita?
Yes.
I understand the first one in the sense of the virus and it's seen via microscope. But the second one, when it's not seen, but it's on a mental level, but it's, unless I misunderstood you because I was trying to write word for word, something about it's about actions. Do you mean like our mental actions?
It could be, but the effect of the microvita, you can't see the microvita, but the effect of the microvita is seen. Now, some microvita cause disease. So maybe you
Yes.
don't see the microvita, but you see the person gets the disease.
So you mean the symptoms?
Symptoms or symptoms are, or some effect. A symptom is an effect.
Effect,
Something
yeah.
observable is seen, even though you don't see the microvita, you see the effect of the microvita.
So that will be different from part 1 when it's the virus stage.
Yes. But the ones that cause disease are probably the ones that are the virus stage.
Okay.
One thing I like to add is that it's known today, and it's been known for about 20 years, that more than half of our DNA consists of old virus particles, either what are called jumping genes, which move genes that move from one part of the gene to another part, but even those are considered to have come originally from viruses that got into cells. So if more than 50% of our genes are from virus DNA, that supports the idea that viruses play a big role in evolution. Okay, it doesn't prove that microvita exist, but it proves that viruses are maybe one of the biggest sources of DNA in our genes.
That was going to be my next question, because I'm studying nutrition, and that comes up a lot on our course, that viruses can be seen as a source of life. So it's not about being good or bad, they're just there.
Yeah, and they can start out as being disease viruses, but the cells create other chemicals that create immunity to those diseases. Okay, and that strengthens the cell so that when the virus comes again, the cell is not affected because the cell fights against the viruses.
Yes, and in some
it
cases there can
incorporates
be
DNA into its own gene, and it can have positive effects also, not only fighting diseases, but it's been shown that the chemicals that allow mammals, okay, including human beings, to give live birth with a placenta, that placenta, you can say it stays attached to the uterus because of chemicals that are brought by viruses. Okay, so the fact that mammalian species don't give birth by eggs is due to viruses that got into the genes of the mammals at a very early stage and changed the way that reproduction happened.
No, absolutely. And I guess in some studies that it's also shown to make certain cells become even more, well, I don't use the word stronger, but even healthier than what it was before, because of how the cells have responded to the virus, I guess.
Yeah.
So all of that for me would be the first category of microvita, because then it can be seen on a microscopic level.
Yeah, from electron microscopes can see viruses quite clearly. So those,
Okay.
and but that's when they've developed into viruses. But before it, according to the microvita theory, when those microvita are in atoms, there are billions of them, and you would not be able to see an individual microvitum before it gets awakened in radioactivity.
Okay.
Then it expands and it grows and develops and takes different shapes according to what minerals are present. Okay, and then you can see them in a microscope. So P.R. Sarkar said that actually there's no such thing as a virus. He said the better word is microvita.
That makes sense.
Of course, virologists will point to virus images in an electron microscope and they'll say, what do you mean there's no such thing as viruses? But there actually is an argument of whether viruses cause diseases or they're just produced by the disease.
Yes.
That's an argument that's still going on. Thanks for those questions.
Thank you so much.
More questions, please? I have a question.
Yes.
How is material science or science in the world have said anything about microvita?
No, they haven't said anything. Because
have not
it
discovered
goes, it goes completely against the materialist philosophy and practice of science today. They don't want to accept any supernatural explanation. Now you can say are microvita supernatural? If they're coming from radioactive atoms, they're coming in a natural way. So this microvita experiment could be done in a completely natural way, but the conclusion might be that the cosmic mind created the atoms that created the microvita. So right now, supernatural explanations are not allowed in science. You can say it's not considered scientific to say that something is created by a creator or by a cosmic mind. That's not allowed in what's called naturalistic science. But if there's no other way to explain the result of, let's say, the microvita radioactive experiment, if only a cosmic mind can explain the result, then it somehow, you have to be honest and say, okay, we don't have any better explanation than to say cosmic mind created microvita. Those microvita formed atoms, those radioactive atoms created viruses, and those viruses created life. You can say there are many steps to that hypothesis, but if someone doesn't accept it, they have to find a better explanation for the creation of those bacteria in the test tube. And that's the job of the theoretical people who look at the results of experiments. They try to explain them, and usually they try to explain them by materialism. In other words, it's just a random interaction of atoms or whatever, and if they maybe accept natural selection, which just means natural processes according to physical laws, but physical laws aren't enough to explain maybe the existence of full developed DNA molecules occurring in a test tube. That can't be explained. That's why the origin of life theories now say that you have to take billions of years to explain the origin of life, because these creation of complex molecules don't happen overnight in a test tube. But that's because they've never seen it happen, and maybe they never did the right experiment. So it really would, microvita being, you can say, as one explanation for a positive result in my experiment, that would create really a scientific revolution, because it would also indicate that materialism is not sufficient for explaining the origin of life in a short time. It could happen in a few minutes, that you bring a radioactive material next to the test tube, and you might see cells just growing under the microscope that weren't there before. And that would, of course, people would normally say, oh, that's not possible. It must have been contaminated. That's how usually those kind of experiments are rejected. They say, oh, you must have contaminated your test tube. You didn't sterilize it enough. You didn't do this and that. But you have to, that's why all these experimental controls have to be done if this experiment is to be done properly. Because if the experiment is done but nobody believes it, it's like it didn't really happen from a scientific point of view.
Is it time today to speak about the positive and negative microvitas? Because I remember Baba said you have positive and you have negative microvitas, and from both sides you can get different effects on the life, in the life of the individual. And also which is very interesting. That what I understood is that we can also communicate, get into, because of our awareness and because of our spiritual position, like our sadhana. So we can change the flow of those microvitas around and within. Is it?
Well, I mean, the Baba Sarkar gave a system called microvita sadhana that certain people he met, and he spent about 2 hours with them explaining some process, which was called microvita sadhana. And we don't know the details of that, but definitely it probably had some good effect on the people who received that process. And Baba also said that people can die if they got microvita, too much positive microvita. So it's even positive microvita can be harmful if it comes in too much intensity. And negative microvita cause diseases, but they could cause diseases for people. But so, for example, snakes might be very happy eating dead fish, okay? Because I don't know if snakes eat dead fish, but for them it's positive microvita. It helps them, makes them healthy. But if people eat the dead fish, they'll get sick. So positive and negative is a kind of a relative term to who's ever exposed to it. It's not just something that's absolutely positive for everybody or everything.
I was going to say, because that doesn't, for me personally, that feels a bit disrespectful to the microvita. It's trying to categorize them as positive and negative, because I just feel like they're just doing their job. So
well, they are
like,
yeah.
sorry, like in a real kind of like basic language thing, like it's just, it works, so it doesn't work. And as you've mentioned, that it does depend on who it's for. Like if the snake eats something and I eat something, we will react differently.
Yeah.
But they're just doing their own role in the most authentic way
They are
possible, I
and
think.
one way to look at negative microvita is that they pull the vibrations of things towards matter. Baba calls them pro-matter. So the vibration is crudified. So if it goes into your mind becomes crudified. If it goes into your body, the body is crudified. And positive microvita make the mind more subtle. Okay, so when Baba said when someone gets a blessing from a guru or some person, they're getting positive microvita, and that changes their glands to make it easier to do meditation. And so it's positive because it has a good effect on their mind. Okay, so it's not just categorizing, it's the effect of the microvita is to make something either more cruder or more subtle. And that's a useful distinction. And that's why, because a snake is maybe cruder than the microvita that it is eating. So for the snake eating the microvita of the dead fish, that'll be okay. The snake will become healthy. But the person will become sick because it's crudifying the person's health. So pro-matter and pro-mind, that's another way to say negative and positive microvita. It doesn't have an idea that it's bad. But if you can say getting sick is bad, then you can say the negative microvita are bad for human beings, at least it makes them sick. But the overall effect of even negative microvita is that it could strengthen your immune system. And that would be a positive effect, at least for the species, because they wouldn't be affected by that same negative microvita in the future.
Definitely. I just wanted to let you know that there's things in the chat. There's questions in the chat. So I don't know if you wanted to read them out.
Maybe someone could look at the chat. Let's see. Okay.
From
yeah,
Dan
I'm looking
Winter
at it. You can. The first ones are at the top. So how long is this meeting for? Well,
You can go ahead.
yeah, I think we'll just until people's questions are answered. Dan Winter asks, Narda has need of a translation. Is Narda still here? Yeah, so I don't know. We didn't know Narda needed a French translation.
Narada said he didn't need it, so we moved
Yeah. Did you want to record? What else?
Narada left.
Explosion by external
yeah.
forces only. I'm looking at the chats. Well, when atoms are radioactive, it's internal forces that cause the radioactivity of atoms. Dan Winter says nuclear radiation atomic decay is by definition entropic, the opposite of negentropic. That's true. Primal soup generated pre-life protein chains precisely because the polarity of the lightning was centripetal, contributing to negentropy. Okay, the polarity of the lightning was centripetal. Okay, that's a technical explanation, but negentropy means going in the opposite direction of the normal laws of physics. And people have tried to explain the fact that life becomes more complex and developed. It seems to be going against the law of nature, and some different explanations can be given for that. Dan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, done.
Yeah, the title of my book is Origin of Negentropy, and I proved that phase conjugate charge implosion is the cause of life, consciousness, and gravity, and precisely quantized by Planck. My book is at fractalfield.com/online book.
Yeah, so, but I mean, I'd have to read the book, but the fact that DNA, RNA information could be transmitted to the opposite side of the planet, they use a computer program to do that.
Well,
So
actually, it's called longitudinal interferometry. DNA is phase conjugate implosive, and it couples to the longitudinal array. And the longitudinal array, aside from being proven the physics of gravity, is the proven physics of action at a distance.
Yeah. Okay, but the question still is, what is the origin of DNA or RNA itself? And
It's called non-destructive charge collapse. DNA based on golden ratio is phase conjugate. That's what makes it centripetal, and that's how it couples with the longitudinal array. For example, during human bliss.
Have you created DNA or RNA in this way?
I predicted how DNA would be affected by human bliss, increased braid coherence density, and now we know the physics that causes that implosion, that centripetal negentropy, causes a connection to what used to be called scalar. It's a longitudinal array. And we've proven action at a distance also with plasma creating action at a distance, verified.net. And the same coherence is what creates ability to lucid dream and clairvoyance.
Yeah, so I think there's clearly something to that, but it may or may not be have a microvita underlying solution. We don't know enough about microvita to say that your explanation is just a different way of explaining microvita.
Well, clearly we have shown how life force is quantized by Planck. Planck's times exponents of golden ratio is how non-destructive charge collapse creates life. So at least we're clear on what quantizes life force. It is Planck.
Okay, but I'm still looking for how you get the first life, and I don't know if you've demonstrated that.
It's called non-destructive self-reentry. It is non-destructive charge collapse. Einstein was clear that's the cause of the solution to the unified field, but increasingly psychologists are now clear charge collapse is the cause of consciousness. It's well agreed. I merely was the first one to describe the origin of charge collapse.
Okay, but which came first, consciousness or charge collapse? You're talking about maybe individual consciousness, but
recursive charge collapse creates a connectivity, and that array of connectivity is the longitudinal array. So effectively what we're calling consciousness, you can tell in the very word, with turning inside out ness, is recursive turning inside out, which is effectively implosion. So non-destructive charge collapse is well agreed to be the cause of consciousness. That's old news. The new information is the cause of charge collapse it's called Planck fire, Planck times golden ratio exponent. It's called phase conjugate fractal non-destructive charge collapse. The films on YouTube have almost 2 million views. My YouTube channel is Dan Winter Fractal Field.
I still think that there is the alternative view that consciousness is more fundamental than charge.
Well, the idea is the unified field is effectively charged. It behaves as a superfluid, and the conductivity that results is when the charge distributes into a longitudinal array. Longitudinal wave mechanics is proven to be the mechanism of not just gravity waves, but actually the cause of life, if you see Tom Bearden's equations in his book, Gravitobiology.
Yeah, oh, that all may be true, but this charge you're talking about may be composed of microvita.
Well, I wonder if there could be,
how it works.
if there could be measurement or evidence. I wouldn't speculate. What we do know is that the universe is comprised of a single contiguous medium. It's compressible and it behaves as a superfluid, and it is called charge.
Right, but that doesn't explain, it doesn't go deeper. You can always go deeper, and I don't think that you don't go deeper than charge. At least as far as I know.
Well, just that consciousness is a name for what happens when charge turns inside out recursively and implodes, and it results in a form of connectivity. For example, when you teach children to make golden ratio in their brain waves, not only do they begin seeing without their eyes, but they begin seeing ancestors. So that longitudinal coherence is the physics of clairvoyance. That's an example. And when you trigger the same field in the therified plasma, we trigger lucid dreaming replicably, which predicts who's going to take memory through death.
Yeah, okay. These are all mental phenomena, and people's superconscious minds may be connected, and that's why that explains these kind of things.
Well, it's just compelling to study longitudinal interferometry because it basically describes not just action and distance, but all spiritual phenomena. It makes spiritual descriptions more romantic because it makes them more precise.
I think that's good, as long as that's still there are stages to science and going deeper and deeper.
If you're interested, the material is at goldenmean.info/measuring life force. Appreciate your interest.
Thanks.
Okay, any more questions?
Well, I have two comments that refresh. Dr. Montagnier, after Jacques Benveniste, who we met, you remember, in
Yes.
Sorbonne. He succeeded, wasn't it, to replicate at distance, was it RNA, DNA, with the right nucleotide on the opposite side of the planet? Would that be something to compare with your proposal?
Well, I wonder if that could have a microvita explanation. He got a particular waveform that
Yes.
he coded in a computer file, and he sent the computer file to Italy or someplace, and they reproduced the waveform, which reproduced the creation of DNA from its components.
Yes.
So that waveform, the question is, what is the waveform doing that builds DNA? And I don't think he had an answer to that, but there is like a signature
Yes.
for DNA, and maybe with that, if you know the signature, you can build the DNA.
So
That was definitely a very
yes.
revolutionary result that he found, and it still needs a good explanation.
We met a person whose father taught this, how do you call that, signal, radio signal, because he set up all the ambulance in Paris to communicate, or the firemen and so on. And his son was adopted by Benveniste. I can put you in touch with him, actually.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, yes.
both Benveniste and Montagnier were pioneers in this field, and they were blocked by the scientific establishment,
It's a
and both
shame.
of them.
Yes, really.
But you know, the truth comes out in the end.
That's true. Yes, and I can put you in touch. We met him it was done in Netherlands, in Amsterdam in 2019, and he's based in Brussels. So he would have a lot to say about Benveniste. They
Yeah,
were very close, yeah. And about this technology, so maybe he could help you. We'll see. My other question, or my the homeopathic process, you know, would would you say it is awakened microvita?
you
By
know,
suppression and,
I'd like to know. I can't really say it.
yeah,
There's definitely something subtle in water that can retain the information of when there's no longer any molecules there. If you shake the molecules every time and then have less and less molecules, finally you have no molecules,
Mhm.
but the water still cures the disease. There's something subtle in the water. But it's called mémoire de l'eau, water memory. But how does water? Is it the molecular structures of the liquid water that carry the information, and can they carry enough information to explain these results? It needs further research.
Yes, yes. Sometimes it's even more, the higher the dilution, the more powerful. Even. Yeah. I think there is a note from Vasudeva. The etymology of virus is poison, venomous substance. Do you want to say it, Vasudeva?
It is an overloaded term because most viruses are known to be either neutral, at least neutral, or in many cases positive. So although the viruses that were initially discovered because they cause diseases, but now it's known that oceans are filled with viruses, the oceans, and most of them are neutral. They don't have any known harmful effects.
My question is there a better word which should not be like completely, a more suitable word, because this is definitely not the right word to use.
Yeah. How about microvita?
Is also something too far away for like
Well, you could,
people to comprehend.
someone could say it means little life, and people are still trying to decide if if viruses are even alive. If they're alive, then they are a little life, but they're not the only kind of microvita.
Could this be called something like life force or something?
Well, then what is the force? You have to explain why force instead of something else. Yeah. Like it used to be thought that there was a special life force scientifically that made living things different from non-living things. But when they studied cells, they found that the cells are all running on their biological machinery, and all of the biological machinery runs according to the laws of physics. And they didn't find any special energy source that is running a cell that's different from solar energy or chemical energy. That cells just seem to run on normal physical energy once they're working. So the question is, if vital energy in yoga is a special term for 10 different kinds of energy, how does that get translated into biophysics, where biophysics just says that the energies in cells are normal physical energies?
So would it be correct to say that viruses are energy? I mean, what would be the simplest possible word?
No, because they're made of molecules. So you can't really just say that molecules are the same as energy. Molecules contain energy, but molecules have a structure that energy itself doesn't have that kind of structure. It may be that the reason why molecules have structure is because of microvita. That's the new part of the science of microvita, is to give form to energy.
So what would be then the closest approximation, which would not be overloaded and the closest, simplest approximation, like in the simplest possible terms?
Energy, it's Einstein once said you should explain things in the simplest way, but not simpler. And if you just say that use energy, it's not explaining why anything has a form or why it has a shape, because energy itself does not have shape.
So
you say
would
it
it be a
needs to
better
be
word?
something. Maybe you can say form causing entity. I mean, Aristotle used to have a term he called the cause of something. Is one of its causes is the form that it has is the cause, and the other is the material cause, made what it's made out of, and one is the efficient cause, that is how it's made. And he also talked about the final cause, which means what's the purpose of the object. And science today only accepts basically the material cause of means what something is made of, and the efficient cause, which is how it's made. It doesn't accept the formal cause or the final cause as actually having scientific value. But that's interesting because microvita seem to have a formal quality to it. They create forms, and materialism doesn't accept things having a teleological or purpose cause. Okay, but if you talk about cosmic mind, the universe is created for a purpose, and one of the purposes is to evolve human beings that are able to realize oneness with cosmic consciousness. So spiritual philosophy does not exclude causes or purposes, but materialism does exclude purposes from explanations, because it's just atoms hitting together in a void, basically, that supposedly created everything. According to materialism, if you just allow physical forces, you won't have any purposes. And you say, well, life is also purposeless, because we could just, our atoms could just break apart and disappear forever, and not disappear, but reform something else. And there's no memory of life and goodness or virtue. It's all just atoms in the void. That's what materialism says.
I just looked up at the definition of life form, because I thought maybe that would be the simplest, primitive, like elementary, but the definition says that it's defined by ability to grow and develop. Can microvita grow?
That's what life is. That's the definition of life. Or you said life form.
Life form, yeah. Would it be wrong to define viruses as a life form? Because they are, right?
Well, they're not accepted as living, so that's the problem. You can't call them a life form if they're not accepted as living.
Okay.
Maybe that definition will change. Maybe in the future they will be accepted as being living, but they still need to be inside another cell in order to reproduce.
I was going to say, because I'm assuming they can't do it unless they're in a living cell. If they're out of the cell, then they die?
No, they just remain as viruses. They can go for millions of years just because they can become a crystal. You can take viruses and turn them into a crystal, and it looks like a salt crystal.
Oh, wow. But they won't be able to do their thing? Is that what you're saying? They won't be able to?
That's right. They'll just be crystallized until they dissolve, and then they go into a cell, and then they'll start reproducing.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
But it's pretty cool that they're just crystals when you put them in that form.
So they go dormant. So that still wouldn't classify them as a living entity, even though they stay dormant.
Well, whether they're dormant or not, because even when viruses are not crystallized, they're not doing anything unless they're in a cell. So they don't die, they just remain like a virus.
Yes,
And they're inactive.
that's the word. Thank you. They're
Inactive.
inactive.
But a seed is also inactive. Like you can have a seed that's millions of years old and it might still grow a sprout once you plant it. So was the seed alive or was it just pre-alive or dormant? A seed is kind of like a virus. It's got DNA in it, but unless it gets the right environment, the DNA doesn't express itself as a growing plant. So in the future, viruses, I think, will be considered to be alive, frankly. But that's just my opinion.
And when you're saying that microvita is only living in viruses, that doesn't include things like bacteria or parasites, or is it all one? Would they be grouped?
No, but viruses are simpler than bacteria. Bacteria is maybe 100 or 1,000 times as big as a virus, at least the average virus. There are big viruses that are the same as size as a bacteria, but most viruses are much smaller than bacteria.
So
Bacteria can they reproduce themselves. They do all the metabolism. Even they can be frozen, but they can be thawed out, and they'll just keep growing. So bacteria are considered living, but viruses today are not considered living.
Right. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay, thank you.
I added one question, maybe. I don't know. What about somatids, microzymes? You know, Antoine Béchamp.
Yeah, I think they have to be considered if there's any relationship between them and microvita.
Yes.
Right now, we don't know. And if microzymas, have they been explained by microbiologists, or are they still a mystery?
Well, we can see them on a microscope. Our friend worked with microscope and special microscope.
Yeah,
and you can see them. And
I understand. But
sorry?
I understand, but are they considered to be something different from all other living beings? I don't know the answer to that. And do you know?
Then
Well,
you have.
We know they appear when the cell is centripetal, and they disappear with disease and loss of life force. We call them living plasma, and I would say longitudinal interferometry accounts for the difference. For example, after vaccination, they generally disappear. That's the measure.
Well, the other question is neutrinos. Neutrinos are known. You can capture them on the other side of the planet.
Yes, neutrinos are well-known physical particles.
Yes.
They don't know all of their properties, but they know they can catch them. There are 3 kinds of neutrinos, and they know relative their mass. They don't know exactly what their mass is, but they know something about them, and they're real, but they're just very subtle, real physical particles.
Mm-hmm. So many mysteries that we don't know.
Just like
I think, Didi, you wanted to share your phone, but you shared it only with us. So if you want to share it again, you need to share with everyone. Didi? Oh, yes. She's sharing. There was a Marie, she said, Namaskar, in my opinion, is this a relevant discovery regarding microvita? Marie, would you like to say more? Please share the link.
Oh, let me look at that link. Muons. Well, muons are well-known physical particles also. So people are always looking for a new force of nature. Physicists would like to find a new force of nature, but so far they haven't found one.
I have a question also about the subtle, how do you call it, light bodies, or this different type of, I forgot the name.
Yeah,
what-
luminous bodies, is that what you mean?
Yeah, but the different types, the ones that are very spiritual, the one, no, what's the name? I forgot.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
about,
Mhm.
what is it? How is it related to microvita? I'm confused there.
Yeah, Baba actually said that the subtlest, one of the subtle kinds of microvita are luminous bodies. And luminous bodies, there's 7 varieties, and some are more spiritual and some are more material. And but there are luminous bodies, and luminous bodies have a physical body that is described as made of only 3 of the 5 physical elements of yoga. They only contain etheric, aerial, and luminous factor. They don't have a liquid and solid body, the luminous bodies. But they are also microvita, but that has to be understood, because a luminous body is also supposed to be someone who died without finishing their karma, and they can be a luminous body for a while, and then they get a physical body again.
Mhm.
So how can it's like an in-between state between human lives. Some people become luminous bodies for some time.
But then they are, you can see them, and you have
Under certain circumstances, you can see them, yeah.
yes, and they move. We have seen they are attracted, for example, by a gathering of people, musicians.
Musicians, yeah,
Or-
some Gandharvas, they are attracted to music.
Yes.
Some are attracted to beauty, some to good qualities, some are attracted to money. Okay, so it's according to your what you thought about most in your previous life. You can become a luminous body that has that particular quality, that's attracted to money, or it's attracted to beauty or cosmetics or music,
So
or spirituality.
are there only 7 of them, or it's like,
Seven named ones.
yes.
They're probably, the Baba named 7, but he also said that there are negative luminous bodies also. I mean, that there are 7 types of negative microvita that are, when people, sometimes they did bad things in their lives, they become negative microvita for maybe millions of years.
So because there are 7, I think 7 are positive and 7 are negative. So it is
Yeah.
Deva yonis and Preta yonis.
Oh, thank you, Didi.
Yeah, the pretayonas are the negative ones.
So are you surrounded, Rudrasha, by a positive microvita to
I
do
hope so.
research?
Baba also speaks about collective microvita. What do you define by collective microvita?
Well, he says on the physical level, when you have many microvita in an atom or a collection of atoms, then the ego starts to emerge from the collective structure of the microvitas. So that's the first mind starts to appear out of matter when in a collective structure. So that's how mind develops out of matter, is because the matter is made of microvita, and when it's organized, it starts showing the qualities of mind. So that's the collective structure of microvita, creates the first mental feelings of a living being.
Also, I heard that the luminous bodies take a long time to reincarnate. And it is because they have in their previous life, they have some attachment either to music or beauty or money. So during sadhana, one should not have any other kind of this type of thoughts, because then at the time of death, it becomes a luminous body. and it takes long time to get again a new body.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful.
Yeah, but even a regular body might take millions of years to get a new body. So it's not only luminous bodies. It depends on, it has to, Prakriti is the one that decides what your next body will be in order to satisfy your karmic reactions that need to be experienced. It can take millions of years
Baba
to
said
get a
it is.
new body. Yeah,
Baba- Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in his book, Anandamarga Elementary Philosophy, he mentioned that it can take millions of years sometimes to get the correct new body, to fit the conditions that are needed to express your sanskars in the new body.
Baba says the cosmic mind directs the bodiless mind to reincarnate in the proper place.
Well, cosmic, maybe he said that in one place, but he specifically says Prakriti is finds the location for the new body. He says because Prakriti creates the laws of karma, and so Prakriti is responsible for finding the conditions to fulfill the experiencing of sanskars. The
But
individual mind can't do that.
Who guides Prakriti?
Well, Prakriti is given permission to act by Purusha, but Prakriti figures out exactly what to do.
I have a question concerning the work, like shamanic work. For example, there were in Bhopal, it was a terrible, catastrophe. And there were people who were practicing a special spiritual practice at sunrise and sunset. They really created like a bubble protection, and they were not affected, even though they were around Bhopal. When we practice kirtans, Baba said it's the same. It's good even if some disaster is approaching. By singing kirtan, it creates this kind of bubble of protection. So I was wondering, is it microvitas, like luminous bodies coming and protecting, creating? What about what people call elementals? You have fairies, but you have also large elementals. Does Baba talk about elementals? Nature spirits and so on.
He mentioned them somehow in the context when he was talking about luminous bodies, but he said that they've basically disappeared as people have stopped thinking about them. So they may have some kind of life force. He wasn't specific.
Okay, so because they say the nature spirits or elementals, they need us and we need them. We are crazy not to work with them because it's kind of a work cooperation.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about elementals.
I have another meeting at 10 p.m. So I would invite everybody to come in 2 weeks. Is that okay for you, Rudresha?
Yeah, at the same time, or you mentioned starting
At
half hour?
7 p.m.
7 p.m. Paris time.
Yes,
That's okay with me.
in 2 weeks, Saturday.
Yes.
And I have here given the email for France and also my telephone that is also WhatsApp. And so for people to know, because we don't have the email of everybody, I just put in different lists. So if you need some information, you can write here. And then you will please tell us which will be the topic next week. And if you have many questions, you can send, and then when he will be here, we have a lot of time for that.
Dan mentioned that there is a time change for you, Rudresha in the US, and ours will be on the 26th. So best maybe to do it on Sundays. So isn't
No, we will do on the 25th. 25th, there is no change.
yeah, for us, but there will be a change for Rudresha. I mean,
Well, I can find out.
okay,
I
that's
can
okay.
adjust for that
Okay,
change.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
For
I'll figure that
Rudresha, it is earlier. Like, for example, we say 7 p.m.
Oh, you're
For
right,
him, it is 11 o'clock. So
Okay.
it will not
And
affect him.
your clock will go ahead and my clock will not go ahead until the next day or something.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll figure that out. In terms of a topic for next time, I mean, it kind of depends on people's interest. I wrote one article which I called MICROVITA as Cosmic Evolutionary Intelligence Agents. And I mentioned how microvita work at all the different levels of the cosmic cycle of creation, from creating matter to explaining what's it called? Divine grace. Divine grace, is Baba explains, is also the action of microvita. And everything in between.
So
That
it is
might be
interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, yeah.
that's something we could talk about next time, among other things.
Sounds interesting. There is another note from Mary. Would you like to?
Yeah. From Mary.
Mary, are you there? I can read it otherwise.
The UK's Science and Technology, that one?
Yes.
The result provides strong evidence for the existence of an uncovered subatomic particle or new force. Okay, that's the muon experiment. We have found the interaction of muons are not in agreement with the standard model. So if that's true, that means they have to change the standard model, which physicists would always like to find new physics. That's what they live for, is to find some new physics. So in the future, they'll be happy to find new physics of microvita, but not yet. Because making atoms out of billions of microvita, that's also new physics. But there has to be a reason for it. There has to be some justification to propose that billions of microvita make an atom. I mean, there should be something that needs to be explained in order to have new physics.
Makes us think a lot. We have to think more.
Yeah. But like if this microvita radioactive experiment works, that suggests that microvita are coming from atoms. So maybe that suggests that there are many microvita in atoms. So that could raise the physics question of microvita.
It's the same with homeopathic remedy.
Yeah, it's always trying to find the explanation for why things work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or why to explain the result of the experiment. If the experiment is good, it has to be explained. That's what scientists do. And then they develop better theories. It just keeps going. Science is probably unending because nature, what is nature? It's the style of action of the cosmic mind, according to P.R. Sarkar. So nature is whatever the cosmic mind uses its creative force to do. And it usually expresses itself in scientific laws and logical formulas. But nature has about 20 different actual definitions when you look at all the possible definitions of nature. Shall we
Yes.
close for now then?
Yes, thank you so much to you and to everybody for coming, and thank you for your nice explanations.
Oh,
So
thank you, Didi.
You are
And
all.
in
Yes,
terms
sir.
of the recording, what can be done with the recording?
Oh, I can send the link. I can send to you by WeTransfer. And to the other people, I will hang it in YouTube, and then I will send them the link for seeing the video.
Yeah, and I can put that on the MICROVITA forum discussion group on
Sure.
Telegram.
Yes,
That'll be
sure.
nice.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you, Dee Dee.
Okay, thank you so much to you and to everybody. So please remember, I have given here, in case you need to find out anything, Ananda Marga France, gmail.com, and this is my telephone WhatsApp for anything. And because I don't know your personal emails, but you know about 2 weeks after. So we meet again here at 7 p.m. with the same link, the same password. And thank you very much for the valuable, everybody can think of their questions for next time.
That's good advice, Dee Dee. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. Namaskar. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thanks.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.